10's Late News with Tracey Spicer.
Tonight, fears a suspected terrorist leader came to Australia to try to set up branches here. Prime Minister Howard stresses the need for absolute loyalty to Australia in the face of terrorist threats. And explosive claims of a Telstra cover-up, a major blow to government plans to sell off the telco. Good evening. Also tonight, Italian authorities demand a full inquiry as villagers begin burying victims of the schoolhouse that collapsed in last week's earthquake. And some guarded words from Princess Di's former butler after he was cleared of theft. But first, disturbing claims a suspected terrorist leader has visited Australia 11 times on what our spy agency ASIO believes were trips to establish a local arm of Jemaah Islamiyah, the organisation linked to terror attacks in Asia.
Abu Bakr Bashir last visited Australia in 1998. The radical Muslim cleric accompanied on most of his trips by a leader within the terrorist group Jemaah Islamiyah. Exactly why they began coming to Australia in 1990 is not clear, but they visited several states.
They seem to have focused their attention on Perth, Melbourne and Sydney. We don't know why they came here, but ASIO assesses that the purpose was to establish a Jemaah Islamiyah influence in Australia.
As ASIO continues its investigation into local links, Indonesian police have reportedly netted the wrong man in relation to the Bali bombing. Arrested because he resembled one of 3 key suspects, police have since admitted the man is mentally ill and had nothing to do with the attack. But back in Australia, the Victorian government has joined New South Wales in boosting funding for anti-terrorist forces, committing almost $40 million over the next 4 years for an elite police unit and new department dedicated to state security.
What happened in Bali could happen on our shores and could happen in Victoria. We have to be prepared and ready with our own police force here in Victoria.
And the man who attempted to steer Australia towards closer ties with Asia has called for public policy to be focused on developing better relations with Indonesia.
We must find our security in Asia, not from Asia. And I think this event is going to focus that effort.
Nicole Strawn, 10 News.
Prime Minister Howard has urged Australians to be tolerant during these troubled times. And he's again stressed the absolute importance of loyalty to Australia.
Addressing congregation at the opening of an Armenian church in Sydney, Prime Minister Howard stressing the need for understanding in these uncertain times.
We must reaffirm our commitment to absolute religious tolerance and absolute respect for differences of religious opinion and differences of religious belief.
But above all, he says Australia must come first.
All we ever ask, as we ask of all Australians, is that their loyalty at the end of the day be to this country, its values, its principles.
The theme continued with news of more than $1 million in government grants to promote unity.
Australians must continue to turn to each other, not turn on each other.
The Living in Harmony money going to more than 40 community groups.
They are grants which will assist these organisations encouraging Australians to get to know each other.
The strive for harmony lost on these protesters. They marched to the Prime Minister's Sydney home to oppose recent ASIO raids in Perth, Melbourne and Sydney.
They're very frightening. Our community become frightening. We don't want to become targeting by them.
They claim they were kept in the dark about the surprise invasions and say officers used heavy-handed tactics.
They don't have to come to our house with the bad manner like that.
Chloe Baker, 10 News.
In Brisbane, protesters marched through the city, calling on Australia to have no involvement in a possible war on Iraq. The activists targeted the Boeing building, claiming it to be the headquarters of terrorism because the company produces military aircraft.
Want your racist war. Good for the rich, bad for the poor. We don't want your racist war.
The protesters claim the military aircraft are America's weapons of mass destruction. And gearing up for battle, thousands of Marines boarding an American warship bound for the Arabian Sea. The aircraft carrier USS Constellation will join military operations in the Middle East, ready to be called into action.
The Constellation is one of the military instruments as we head west If the president needs us, we'll be there to support this global war against terrorism.
Explosive allegations of a major cover-up by Telstra. Claims the telco lied to Parliament and in court about the so-called casualties of Telstra cases have prompted demands for a full royal commission.
The allegations couldn't have come at a worse time. As the government tries to push through the sale of the rest of Telstra, employees within the giant telco stand accused of lying to the courts, Parliament and illegally bugging customers' phones.
These are very serious accusations. We need a royal commission in order to determine whether these accusations are correct and whether there is a case for criminal proceedings.
The problems reach back a decade when ordinary Australians complained technical glitches prevented calls from reaching their businesses. Telstra denied the problems, but then allegedly bugged and recorded conversations by at least one person, passing that information on to lawyers.
This is characteristic of Telstra's behaviour, of bullying people that it's in dispute with.
As the complaints continued, legal action ensued, where employees of the company were accused of withholding documents under legal professional privilege and lying under oath.
We are deeply, deeply concerned that if an Australian company, our biggest company, has misled the Senate, then that is something it needs to be held to account for.
The minister was aware of the accusations and says he's passed on information to relevant authorities. But there are allegations he twice tried to personally contact the investigating solicitor.
Well, I may have done.
In a statement, he rejects absolutely any claim or inference he sought to influence a police inquiry. His department is now investigating allegations that Telstra employees have misled the courts and Parliament. Victoria's major fraud group has been investigating for several years. It says it's had no coercion from an outside party. No charges have yet been laid. Telstra also denies acting improperly, saying it's cooperated fully with an independent arbitration process. Leonie Mellor, 10 News.
And still to come in 10's Late News, moves to rename WA's highest hill after Lang Hancock. Controversial calls by doctors to teach teenagers how to fall pregnant. And a much different role ahead for a once proud ship of the Royal Australian Navy. You're watching 10's Late News. As Italians begin burying victims of last week's earthquake, authorities are demanding a full investigation into why the village school was the only building to collapse. 29 people, mostly children, died in the tragedy.